All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Monday evening to learn more about how you can prepare your home and property for extreme weather. My name is Ian McVeigh. I am the Manager of Sustainability for the region of Durham. And my job is really to lead the implementation of Durham Region's climate change plans, including the Durham Community Climate Adaptation Plan and the Durham Community Energy Plan. A big part of implementation is arming our residents with the knowledge and tools to take action in their own homes and on their own properties. That's why we've launched a webinar series to help educate residents and homeowners about what they can do to take steps on their own home. This is the second in a series, and this one's focused on extreme weather, which I think is apt, particularly given some of the weather that we experienced yesterday. Stay tuned for information about upcoming webinars with expert speakers planned throughout 2021. Next slide, please, Kate. So I wanted to go through the housekeeping items, thanks. So just a few housekeeping notes. So we've got about an hour and a half today. So about 60 minutes of presentation followed by a 30-minute Q&A. Questions will be answered at the end, so please submit your questions via the question box. Actually, it should say the question box. All attendees are muted just so we can ensure a smooth flow of presentations. The webinar is being recorded. Actually, is it being recorded, Kate? Is it being recorded as we speak? It is, I see that, great. And it's gonna be posted on the region's website within the next, I'd say hopefully within the next week after this webinar is finished. And then all people that have registered will receive an evaluation survey as well as copy of the presentations and any other links to supporting material after the webinar. So with that, I want to just launch a couple polls so that we can get a sense of who is joining us. So Kate, if you could hit the first poll, which I think is asking people where they're coming from. So you should be able to just click your answer there. All right, great. Lots of people from Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, and Oshawa. Not so much representation from the north, which is interesting, and a few people from outside of Durham. All right, great. And the next slide, Kate. The next poll, I guess. Have you experienced damage to yourself and or your property due to high winds, snow, ice, and or hail? And this might have jumped a lot in the last 24 hours. I was lucky not to. I think the worst I had was my garbage can blow away, but hopefully no one had very serious impacts. Yes, so lots of people are experiencing impacts. That's well, you're in the right place. Hopefully with the information we're sharing today and through this webinar series, you can help get a bit more understanding of what steps you can take. So next slide, please. I just wanted to start with a little bit of context and history of climate change. So, as I'm sure many folks know, worldwide climate scientists agree that fast rising global temperatures have created a climate crisis. So in 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their special report on global warming that really provided the scientific evidence for the need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So the IPCC stated that this is possible, but will require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. So it's clear that we need to be taking purposeful action at all levels, including individuals, households, neighborhoods, local municipalities, regional, province, on and on, to reduce emissions and also to prepare for the increasing incidence of extreme weather events of all kinds. Municipalities like the region are key, as we have influence over at least 40% of emissions across the community, as well as influence on community resilience through planning and development, through infrastructure, and like this, through our relationships with our residents. So while the current climate trends are alarming, there is reason for hope. At the local and the global level, we have the power to make decisions, to take action, and take actions that will protect our climate and our region. The technological solutions are there, the skills and knowledge exist to transition to a low carbon, climate resilient region. The bad news is we don't really have the luxury of time, and business as usual is no longer an option. So that's really the context. And if you go to the next slide, please, Kate. The context that really, I guess, at the more local level, is, I'm just waiting for the slide to switch. So we did some work, Durham Region did some work with scientists at the University of Toronto and with the Great Lakes Integrated Science Assessment Center at University of Michigan to develop some, to bring that global data down to the local level to help inform our planning and decision-making around climate adaptation. And you can see some of the results here. The results, are, well, I guess the results at the highest level are that we're expecting warming of upwards of 5 degrees Celsius, which might sound nice, but there's more to the story. On the next slide, if you would, Kate. You can see what this translates to. And so when you look at days above 30 degrees Celsius, we're looking at a tripling of days above 30 degrees Celsius by mid-century, and then by towards the end of the century, hitting upwards of 2 months of days above 30 degrees, which of course has all kinds of bad impacts for our vulnerable residents, but also for our infrastructure, which wasn't designed for that kind of climate. Similarly, with days below 20, well, I guess the opposite, a marked decrease in days below 20, which again might sound nice, but there's much more beyond that story, including increasing in freeze-thaw cycles, which has a lot of impacts on buildings and infrastructure, but also rain on snow events, which increase the risk of flooding because there's not an ability for that rain to soak into the land. And then building on that annual precipitation, we're looking at upwards of a 20% average annual increase as we hit mid-century and beyond. But more importantly, that's going to fall in more short duration intense rain events, which are the type of events that lead to local stormwater systems being overwhelmed. And so the story here is one of, things are going to get a lot wilder, a lot wetter, a lot warmer. And so we need to think about, all of us need to think about how we're going to prepare. So next slide, please. So that's what we are doing at Durham Region. This is the context for climate action. Regional Council declared a climate emergency in January 2020 in order to further support the implementation of our existing climate change plans. We need to work together as part of the global effort to bend the curve on greenhouse gas emissions and help to blunt that temperature rise that we're already seeing. But we also need to act locally to adapt to the climate changes that are already here and that are going to continue due to past and ongoing greenhouse gas emissions. So Durham Region is committed to being a leader. We've developed leading edge climate change plans that address both climate mitigation, which is our Durham Community Energy Plan, as well as climate adaptation, the Towards Resilience Plan. All of this is being done really in close collaboration with local area municipalities, with our energy utilities, post-secondary institutions as part of a collective effort to address climate change in Durham Region. And the next slide, please, just provides a few key examples of climate action programs that we have underway that are public facing. So we have the Leaf Backyard Tree Planting Program, which launched in July 2020, so just a few months ago in Pickering, Ajax with the Oshawa and Scugog, which is providing subsidized backyard trees for residents, which provides important stormwater attenuation and heat island reduction impacts. We have eMission, which was launched by Oshawa Power, but through collaboration with Alexicon and the region is going to be it's our electric vehicle strategy that's planned to be launched in 2021, which includes electric vehicle charging infrastructure, a series of test drive events, and education and awareness platform. So look out for that. We have the Durham Home Energy Savings Program, which is being developed in collaboration with Oshawa Power, with Alexicon, with local area municipalities, that will be supporting deep energy renovations on existing homes. And we are certainly thinking about adding on stormwater renovations and retrofits as part of a more holistic home renovation program for sustainability. And then finally, I wanted to give a nod to WIPB and the WIPB Green Standard, which passed council, I think, in September, which is a really important toolkit to advance sustainable development, low carbon, climate resilient development in new suburbs and new development areas. So as that moves forward into implementation, I think that's going to be an important role given the population growth that we're expecting across the region. So that's just a few highlights of things that we have underway to say that we are taking action, and we certainly education and awareness is a key part of that. So that's really the context for the webinar, and I want to provide thanks and introductions to our panelists who are with me today. So we have Caitlin Rochon, who's an emergency management coordinator for the region of Durham, responsible for the municipal response to all emergencies, so natural, man-made, technological. She was thrust into emergency management in 2013, following 2 record-setting floods in the Toronto area, and has since taken a keen interest in climate adaptation and the policy levers available to municipalities to reduce risk to life and property. Glenn McGilvery is Managing Director of the Institute of Catastrophic Loss Reduction, or ICLR for short. It's an institute of Western University out of London, Ontario. ICLR is the oldest university-based disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation research institute in Canada. So we're really happy to have Glenn here to share his wealth of knowledge. And then finally, we have Moran McDonald, who's the Vice President of Distribution Operations at Alexicon Energy. She's been busy over the past 24 or 30 hours dealing with, she oversees the frontline workers responding during power outages. And so I'm sure she's put in a lot of hours over the past little while, and we're again really thankful and lucky to have her with us today. Prior to joining Alexicon, Moran worked at the Toronto Region Conservation Authority in municipal infrastructure protection. So actually, Caitlin worked at TRCA as well, and so did I. So we have a few alumni of TRCA here. So a lot of expertise around the table. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Caitlin for the opening presentation. And thank you everyone again for joining us.
Thank you, Ian, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to be speaking to you about some of the things that you can do right now to be more prepared for the next emergency, be it a pandemic shutdown, wild weather that causes a power outage like we experienced just yesterday, or even a nuclear emergency. Most people haven't really thought about emergency preparedness before this pandemic, and that's okay. There's really 2 main reasons why I found that people don't prepare for emergencies. First, it's that they're overwhelmed, and second is that they're in denial. If you're feeling overwhelmed, this might just feel like, being emergency prepared is one more thing you need to worry about. But I have good news. I take a very simple approach to emergency preparedness. Just a few small actions can make a huge difference for you and your family. So I'm not going to be sending you forms or huge checklists. You can do these things right now. Denial. You might not realize you're in denial, but if you are listening to me speak and you're thinking, what is this lady talking about? This won't happen. If it does happen, it won't be bad. If it's bad, there's nothing I can do about it anyways. You might just be in denial. And the reality is that there's a lot of things that you can do now to improve your outcome. Over the last year, my family fared okay. When the shutdown happened back in March, we had the things that we needed to hunker down. Had this been a blackout or a shorter duration emergency, we would have been just fine. And this is important because when my family's prepared to be self-sufficient and have the supplies that we need, it does a few things. Kate, can you just go back to my slide deck? I'm going to do the poll after my second slide. Thank you. So first, it takes the pressure off of first responders and community aid organizations so that they can help the people that are the most vulnerable. And so those people might be people that don't have the privilege of having a stocked pantry, someone who's on a fixed income, or maybe someone who's in a life-threatening situation. And secondly, it puts me in a position where I can be a resource to my community and to my neighbors. I know that my family's okay, so that I can go to work for my colleagues. I can help them source PPE. I can check on my neighbors. I can be the person to pick up supplies for my neighbor who's immunocompromised. All right, I'm ready for my poll now. All right. So if you had to stay in your home right now for 4 days, would you have the supplies that you think you'd need? Oh, 78% thinks that they have the supplies they'll need, which is great because I have been doing, I've been doing emergency preparedness basically since 2013. And all I see over and over again are these huge, like 500 item kits and so many things that you need. And I don't believe in that at all. I think that it really comes down to an individual level and having the things that are important for your family individually. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so the thing about, oh, next slide, please. The thing about unexpected events is that they happen all the time. The nuclear emergency in Fukushima, the derailment in Lac Mégantic. We have nuclear generating stations and train rail lines right here in Durham region. You need to have a plan for how you'll meet up. And I know right now it might seem like you can't get away from your family, but usually we're all really busy. Work, school, appointments. We're often separated from our loved ones. How will we reconnect if there's an emergency and we can't go home? What happens if you're physically separated by an emergency scene that you can't get through, like a chemical fire on one of the rail lines? Just last week, November 10th, was the 41st anniversary of the Mississauga train derailment. 24 cars derailed, propane tankers exploded, and others caught on fire. It was the biggest evacuation in Canadian history, over 240,000 people, and some lucky day because there was absolutely no casualties. If something like this happened in Durham region, would you know where to meet up with your family? Next slide, please. So there are times like last night where you'll be able to hunker down at home, blackouts, ice storms. We've experienced these types of emergencies. If you have the supplies you need at home, this will barely be a blip on your radar. It could even be a positive experience for your family. But if you don't have something important, like a very important prescription, this can very easily become a really stressful situation. So your stuck-at-home essentials are different than mine. You might need a generator. You might need propane for your barbecue, or you might only need a few pantry staples. Next slide, please. So the next thing is to pack a go bag. It's the only emergency kit you need. It doesn't have to be huge. You don't need army rations. It should just be the supplies you need if you're stuck on the side of the road on the hottest or coldest day of the year, plus whatever you need to get to your grandma's, your cousin's, your cottage, wherever it is that you choose as your location. Some people suggest keeping your go bag or emergency kit in your hall closet, but it's not really helpful there when your house burns down. So you should keep it in your trunk. If you don't have a car, you probably don't need an emergency kit. If you have to go to an evacuation center, they will have all the supplies there that you need. Next slide, please. Back up your documents. It's important that you have backups of your critical documents. So many times I've heard of people keeping these documents in their basement. A flood happens and those are now coated in fuel, dirt, mold, sewage. You need to keep a copy somewhere, in a secure digital cloud, in a safe at your cottage, or at a bank in a safe deposit box. I personally like the idea of a cloud location, but you just need to make sure that it's encrypted and secure, and then you can access it anywhere. Next slide, please. And when an emergency happens, know that there are so many people out there willing to help you. If you need a hand, just let your friends know. Go online to your existing social media groups or join a new one, like a Caremongers group on Facebook, and they'll help you get what you need. And if you're prepared yourself, you can give back to your community. I'm headed to the grocery store. Does anybody need anything? It's as easy as that, and honestly, you will make such a difference to someone. Next slide, please. I love this quote from Mr. Rogers. Look for the helpers. You'll always find people who are helping. And by doing a few things to prepare, you can be emergency ready. Next slide. All right, so our office will be launching new emergency preparedness resources in the next few months. So stay tuned for our new At the Ready branded items. If you're interested, you can send a message to the email here and we'll let you know when everything's ready and how to get them mailed to you for free. So remember, make your meetup plan, gather your stuck-at-home essentials, pack a go bag and put it in your trunk, and make sure you have a backup of the really important documents and records. And when an emergency happens, be a helper. Next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, Durham Region, double check, yes, next week, Durham Region and the province of Ontario are going to be testing our nuclear public alerting system. So depending on where you live, you'll get a call to your landline phone, hear sirens, or get an alert to your cell phone. Just remember, it's just a test. If you'd like to get more information about nuclear emergency preparedness and learn how to prevent exposure to radioactive particles in the unlikely event of an emergency, you can visit durham.ca/nuclear preparedness, and there's lots of information available there. So that's all from me, so I'll hand it back over to you, Ian.
Great, thank you very much, Caitlin. I'm going to just hand it over to Glenn to share his presentation about from the ICLR. Over to you, Glenn.
Thanks very much, Ian. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you didn't experience property damage last night, but that's one of the things we'll be talking about over the next couple of minutes. Next slide, please. These are the things I want to talk about today very briefly. Disasters are a growing threat. We all kind of know this in our heart of hearts. We don't always do what we're supposed to do in the face of this. But I think it's important that we start preparing, because we're going to see more severe weather in the future, more storms like we saw last night, more heavy rainfall events, more heavy wind, and that sort of thing. It's best to be ready. Losses are rising. Why is this the case? I'll discuss that briefly. And finally, what can be done about it? Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to do a poll. Very interesting result here. Oftentimes after an event strikes, only a small proportion of people will actually do their homework and start taking action to make sure it doesn't happen again, usually in the order of 5% of people. So this is great to see. And hopefully we can convince people of the importance of preparing for the next event. Okay. So first of all, let's look at the global disaster numbers, or catastrophe numbers. We in the industry call them CATs. And so these are data from Swiss Reinsurance Company. It's the largest reinsurance company in the world, and they track disaster losses. And so the blue bar at the bottom, those are man-made disasters. It's otherwise known as technical disasters, and that could be a plane crash, a train derailment, anything of that nature. And the blue line are natural disasters. Now, I know there's a discussion that all disasters are man-made. There's no such thing as a natural disaster, because the damage is because of us, not because of nature. I know that argument very well, but here we have to somehow differentiate between disasters that are not caused by storms and earthquakes and things like that, those that are caused by a plane crash or things of that nature. So last year we had 115 man-made or technical disasters declared globally, and we had 202 natural disasters declared globally. And a lot of them have to do with North Atlantic hurricanes, wildfires in California, things of that nature, but we certainly get our share here in Canada as well. So these are the sheer number of natural disasters that fit a certain criteria. Next slide, please. These are the costs, the insured costs and uninsured costs of those very same disasters. And what Swiss Re has done here, they've numbered a few of the big events that we've seen over the last little while. Number 10, big wildfires in California last year, and Typhoon Jebi in Asia. Number 9, Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, also known as HIM. Number 5, Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma, something like $110 billion in insured losses from those events. So really, really big storms. And certainly we can see that the cost of these events are growing year after year. The trend is upward for sure. Next slide, please. Those were the international data. These are the Canadian data. This is kept by Insurance Bureau of Canada. And again, the trend that we see here in Canada is the trend that we're seeing internationally as well. We're seeing more disaster losses, and they're getting costlier for various reasons. Climate change is one of them, but also the fact that we're just bigger targets. We have more stuff now. When I was a young man, we had one not so great used car in the driveway. Now it's very common to see 2, 3, or 4 cars in the driveway. We appoint our basements very nicely now. It goes on and on and on. So one of the biggest reasons why disaster expenses are going up is just that we have more stuff in a tight place, usually in an urban area, a dense urban area. But we're seeing year after year more and larger disasters here in Canada. Next slide, please. So I showed you Swiss Reinsurance Company data before. These are Munich Reinsurance Company data. And one of the reasons why I like to use this slide is it shows where the losses are coming from, or where the growth and losses are coming from. And the long and short of it is the losses are not coming from earthquake. They're not coming from geophysical events like landslides and things like that. Losses are coming from storms, and the growth and losses are coming from storms and from climatological events as well. So floods, heat waves, wildfire, other types of storm, convective storm, and things of that nature. This is where the losses are coming from, and this is where the growth in these losses are coming from. Next slide, please. So let's go on to our next poll. Do you believe the weather in your area has gotten more severe in recent decades, less severe, or has remained the same? Well, there you go. I think this is the general consensus. When you talk to people who work in emergency management, they'll say the same thing. Insurance, reinsurance, government, homeowners, everybody seems to be saying the same thing. They're seeing more severe weather. It's getting worse. It's getting costlier. So what I find, I've been doing this a long, long time. As a matter of fact, today or yesterday, I'm having my 15th anniversary with ICLR, but I worked for a Swiss Reinsurance Company before that. I've been in the insurance game for about 30 years now. And the growth in disasters has really hit an uptick in the last 10 years in Canada. The data is showing that we're just seeing more and more costly losses since about 2008, 2009. Indeed, over the last 10 years, we've had at least almost $1 billion in losses every year, and sometimes worse than that. I'm just going to go through some of the losses. This is by no means a comprehensive list. Just give you an example of some of the things that we've seen over the last few years, and that would include the flooding in southern Alberta in 2013, June 2013. That cost insurance companies $1.7 billion in damage. I mean, this is what happens when you get a major flood in a city of 1 million people. The Saddle Dome up there in the top right corner of that photograph, that claim alone cost insurers about $110 million. Next slide. 2-3 weeks later, we get a major rainstorm in Toronto. As a matter of fact, 2 cells planted over Toronto. One sat on the southern portion of the DVP, the other sat on the southern portion of the 403 or 427 rather. And we had about $1 billion in insured losses from that event. It rained biblically for 3 hours. Lots of basement flooding, lots of impact on small business and large business, and some impact on vehicles. So in the course of 2 or 3 weeks, we had Canada's costliest flood and second costliest flood. Next slide, please. At the end of that same year, just to ensure that we had a really, really horrific year, we threw in an ice storm in the last week of the year. If you recall, that storm caused about $225 million in insured damage. Funny thing is, about half of that $225 million came from flooded basements. Because there was no power, people's sump pumps didn't work, and their basements flooded. You wouldn't always connect an ice storm with basement flooding, but in this case, it's real, particularly for those people that have sump pump systems. So 2013 was an absolutely horrendous year in Canada. We had the flooding in southern Alberta, the flooding in Toronto, the ice storm, and also the Lac Mégantic disaster. So it was quite the year. Next slide, please. August 2014, another biblical rainstorm in Burlington, Ontario, 90 million in insured damage. I took this photo. I got caught in this event. It's the first time I ever got caught in one of these things. Something like 3,000 basements flooded, lots of other damage. Really incredible rainstorm event. I live next door in Oakville. Could have been Oakville. There's no reason why it couldn't have been Oakville, but just in this case, it happened to be Burlington. Next slide, please. Also that year, about a $545 million hailstorm in Airdrie, Alberta. For once, Calgary got spared, but Airdrie got whacked really hard. Basically, every car that was not undercover in that town, including all the cars at this Mazda dealership, were heavily damaged. When you get big hailstorms, you also start seeing roof problems, siding, rooftop HVAC systems in commercial buildings, windows, doors, all sorts of things. So this is about a $545 million hailstorm event. Next slide, please. 2016, May, Fort McMurray wildfire, largest wildfire in Canadian history. For a very short time there, it was the largest, costliest wildfire in world insurance history until one of those big California fires took over. But this was an incredible event, roughly $4 billion in insured damage. About 2,400 homes were lost in Fort McMurray. That only represented about 6 or 7% of town. I often hear that most of town burnt down. That was not true. It was less than 10% of town burnt down, and it was still a $4 billion loss. So we as bad as it was, we dodged a massive bullet in 2016. Next slide, please. Windsor, Canada, major flooding event, September of 2016. This was not due to a river. It was not due to a lake. It was due to heavy rainfall. So in that extent, to that degree, everybody in Canada is at risk of flooding. We all live close to water if it rains where we live, and it does. Incredible rains this time around, hundreds of basements flooded, $108 million in insured damage. Next slide, please. Similar thing in Sydney, Nova Scotia, just a few months later, or a month later, October 2016. Again, heavy rainfall related. This was not related to a body of water. It will flood any place where it rains a lot in a very short period of time. That's what happened in Toronto. I showed you a few slides back, 2013. When it rains heavily over a very short period of time, you will get flooding. About $100 million of insured damage from this event. Next slide, please. No, this is not a mistake. Windsor gets whacked again. Another heavy rainfall event, almost a year to the day of that event I showed you 2 slides back. Over 124 million in insured damage, something like 650 basements flooded or something of that nature. Huge other impacts as well. A lot of people that were flooded in 2016 had just got their lives back together, just got the basement fixed up. Insurance company left, finished up the job, and then it rained again and it flooded again. A lot of people didn't put mitigation in to prevent it from happening again, and they got whacked a second time. This whole idea that it won't happen to me, oh, well, it did happen to me, okay, it'll never happen again. Oh, it happened again. We're seeing more and more of that. Next slide, please. May 4th, 2017. Really, I was thinking a lot about this event last night. I really wondered if yesterday's storm was going to be similar to this one. This was just a big flatline windstorm event, no tornadoes, nothing of that nature, just wind going right across southern Ontario, right across southern Quebec to the tune of $600 million plus in insured damage. This is a picture of my in-law's backyard. My father-in-law was in the path of that tree, 80 some odd years old, heard the tree crack and ran like hell, just got out of the way in time. I'm really going to be curious to see what kind of numbers come out of yesterday's event. But this one was really a shocker to the insurance industry. Never seen anything like it before, $600 million just from a windstorm. Next slide, please. So first of all, how do we define a disaster or catastrophe in the insurance industry? Well, we define it as an event that costs $25 million in claims or higher. That's generally how we define a catastrophe. So with that in mind, what happens when we add up all the events of $25 million in claims or higher from 2008 to last year inclusive? What do we get? Advance the slide, please. We get a big number, $19.1 billion, just over the last 10 years, 11 years alone. I've been at this a long time, it'll be 30 years next year. I've been studying catastrophes for more than 20 years. And this is a huge number for a country like Canada. Trust me, this is really, really big. Next slide, please. These numbers do not include what's going on or what has happened in Canada this year. So we had a $1.3 billion hailstorm in Calgary in June of this year. They're still working through that. There's a long tail on hailstorms because there's only so much capacity for auto body shops, roofers, siding companies and that sort of thing. So they're still working through the huge number of claims created from this event, 1.3 billion insured damage. Next slide. In the spring, we had major flooding in Fort McMurray, Alberta. Yeah, Fort McMurray got whacked again. One time fire, this time water. April 2020, we're looking at well over 520 million in insured damage from this spring ice jam related flooding. So this wasn't heavy rainfall related flooding, it was river flooding. So what's going on? Why are losses rising? I can do a 3 or 4 hour webinar and tell you all the reasons why losses are rising. There's so many different causes for it. But at ICLR, we like to look at 3 major issues. First of all, there are more people and property at risk. The bigger target, basically what I talked to you about before. Our infrastructure is in a very poor state, particularly our stormwater management infrastructure. And finally, the climate is indeed changing. Next slide, please. So what can we do about all this? There are 2 things that we could do, 2 major categories of things. The first is loss prevention, and the second is risk transfer. The second point basically means make sure that you have proper insurance in place. Your home is the biggest asset you have if you own your home. You will never have anything costlier than that. I know of people, I've heard of people who have said, oh, I have proudly paid off my mortgage and canceled my homeowner's insurance because I don't need it anymore. Well, really, what's going to happen to you when that house, that $800,000 house with $250,000 of belongings disappears overnight in a fire or a flood? What are you going to do then? Very important that you have proper insurance in place. But the other thing is loss prevention. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. That loss prevention can be broken down further into 3 subcategories. Next slide, please. First of all, there are things that we could build, things that we could do to mitigate the impact of natural disasters. On a big scale, it could be dams, seawalls, levees, and dikes, and fire breaks, and things like that. But on a small scale, it's just things that you can do to your own property, and we'll discuss those in a few minutes. There are non-structural measures as well. These are more ideational public policy things like land use planning guidelines and things of that nature. But when it comes down to the homeowner, really be curious about where you're going to live. If you're looking for a new home, if you're looking to move, if you want to know more about the risk in your own area, be curious, look into it, find out what has happened there in the past, what potentially can happen in the future, and try to take actions to mitigate it. And thirdly is public awareness, essentially what I'm doing right now. Next slide, please. At ICLR, we are multidisciplinary in nature. We deal with all sorts of researchers, but we're also multi-hazard. There are a lot of ICLR type of organizations throughout the world that only work on flood or only work on earthquake or only work on volcano. We do it all. We do wildfire research, earthquake, wind, hail, and water. And today I'm going to concentrate on wind, hail, and snow and ice. But we're not going to touch wildfire. In Durham, we're not really in wildfire country, and we're not really in earthquake country here. We're going to concentrate on those other things. And there was already a water session a few months back, so we won't deal with that today. Next slide, please. So this slide is kind of meant to be a placeholder slide. It's meant to just kind of give you a little taste of the information that ICLR has. And we have an awful lot of it on our website, iclr.org, on our YouTube channel as well. There's a lot of information. The backbone of our outreach to homeowners, however, is in our Protect Your Home From booklets. So on the left-hand side, you have Protect Your Home from basement flooding, from severe wind, from earthquake, from snow and ice storms, from wildfire, and from hail. I really encourage you to check out these books. They're free. They're on our website. They're available in both English and French. There's a great deal of information in these booklets, and they basically represent the state of the knowledge. On the right side there are just a couple of examples of some of the focus on booklets that we have that get into a particular topic in more detail. Those include focus on sump pump systems, basically everything you need to know about a sump pump. Same thing, focus on backwater valves and emergency generators. We also have a 4th booklet called Focus on Flood Maps. So if you want to know what, everything you need to know about a flood map, check out that booklet as well. Check out all these booklets. They're on our website. But let me go through a few things right now. So next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about wind. Now this graphic comes right out of our Protect Your Wind, your House Home from Wind booklet, so you can check it out. The thing about wind is if you really want to get down to it, the changes that have to be made to your house are often structural. They're often behind the drywall. Nobody's going to run out tomorrow and start ripping down the drywall and start putting bracing in and things of that nature, really. So this comes into play when you're doing a major renovation, when you're doing an addition, when you're having a new home built, for example, or if you're moving. Okay, so you might not want to do some of these things right now, but if you live in tornado country, they're a consideration. But starting at the bottom there, lots of the information has to do with roofs and lots of information has to do with windows and doors. So at the bottom left there, if you have a double door, a double front entry door, install a heavy duty bolt or slide bolt at the bottom and top of those doors. Double entry doors are horrendously bad for vulnerability. In Vaughan, Ontario in 2005, we had an outbreak of tornadoes that day. In an F2 tornado, many homes with double front entry doors had the front doors blown in from the wind. They're not very strong because they bolt into each other. They don't deadbolt into the door frame. And so those doors fail, they blow open, wind gets in the home, and in a few cases in Vaughan, we had the roof completely lost due to a tornado event. Securely anchor any outdoor accessories like air conditioners or utility sheds and things of that nature. Even other things like patio furniture can become missiles, and unfortunately, some of you may have experienced that yesterday. Doors, both front entry doors and garage doors, should be pressure rated, okay? Now, I understand you're not gonna run out tomorrow and buy a pressure rated door. One of the important considerations though is the garage door. Garage door is the most vulnerable opening in your home. What we also saw in Vaughan is the garage door failing in the tornado, and then the wind will enter into the garage and the roof would fail. The roof would then lift off of the property, blow down the block, hit other homes, and become basically torpedoes or missiles. And so we really encourage people that if you're going to replace a garage door, try to get a pressure rated door if you can. And there are other things here that should be considered. If you're re-roofing your roof, get a shingle that's rated high for wind, for example. If you have a gable-ended roof, it's the type of roof indicated in this drawing, the roof with basically triangles at each end. Problem with the gable-ended roof is they're secured to the top plate of the wall only on two sides. So you might want to look into having that roof better braced down. So anyway, check out the booklet. There are things in there that you can do right away. There are other things that are a little bit more detailed. But again, you know, if you're moving, if you're having a new house built, if you're doing a renovation, some of these things would be very valuable to you. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Glenn, it's Kate. I'm trying. Sorry, it seems a bit delayed. My apologies.
Okay, no problem. The next slide I think we're going to show you is from the hail book, Protect Your Home from Hail. Now I have to say we don't really get really large damaging hail in this part of the world. Okay, it's not to say that we've never had it. It's not to say we're not ever going to get it. But some of the really big hailstorms that we've had in Canada historically have been in Alberta, and particularly around the Calgary area. So would I take a lot of measures myself to protect my home against hail living in Oakville? I don't think I would, but there are things you might want to consider. So if you are re-roofing, if you're putting new asphalt on your roof, you can talk to your roofer about a impact resilient shingle. They don't cost that much more than a normal shingle, but what we're talking about here is a class 4 impact resilient shingle. And this will handle up to 95% of hailstorms that we get anywhere, even the worst storms in Dallas and Fort Worth, Oklahoma, Calgary. Class 4 asphalt shingle will handle most of these events. So a really important consideration. Vinyl siding does not perform very well in large hail, and that should be no surprise to anybody. That storm that we had in June of this year, really it pulverized a lot of vinyl siding. A lot of homes with vinyl siding had extensive damage. And so would I, forego vinyl siding if I lived in Durham and put up like a hardy board or a cement fiber board? I don't think I would. It's quite costly. If you like it for its looks, for its durability, for other reasons, by all means. I don't think I would reside my house to hardy board because of the threat of hail. I could be wrong. You might get damaging hailstorm next spring, for all I know. But we don't generally get these types of events in this part of the world. But it's an important consideration anyway. Roofing, though, roofing is important. You might want to consider an impact-resilient shingle, and you might want to consider underneath the shingle putting in a underlayment like an ice and water shield, and that's indicated by that blue cutaway. So that's an ice and water shield. We don't normally put those on roofs as per like the normal course of business, but they are really a great consideration for basically sealing the roof deck and ensuring that if a hailstorm damages your roof, you're not going to get water penetrating into the home afterwards. So important considerations. Windows, we see damage to windows and doors in really big hailstorms. And again, I don't think I'd run out and buy triple paned windows because of hail. I'd buy them for other reasons like energy efficiency, but not necessarily for hail. How do you protect a vehicle against a hailstorm? Put it under cover. That's the best way to do that. There are hail blankets that you can buy for cars that purport to protect cars against hail. These have never really been tested in any scientific way, so I'm really antsy about encouraging people to get them, but they are a consideration if you don't have a garage or a carport or something like that. But if you do have a garage or carport, and if the weather man is calling for a severe convective storm, you might want to put your car under cover. I wonder if we can get to the next slide. Is the advancing working?
Yeah, I had to take over. I think Kate's was frozen, and I'm struggling with the right view because I think you're seeing the notes view.
Yeah.
Anyways, does this, how's that?
There you go.
All right.
Thank you. I wonder, yeah, okay, we'll stay here. When it comes to snow and ice, there are a lot of the actions that you can take are far more practical than they are for wind, for example. So making sure that your gutters are clear from debris and properly drained, because you don't want the ice dam situation. So if you've ever seen big globs of snow, big chunks of ice just hanging there at the edge of the roof on the eaves trough, that's called a snow dam. And that can cause a heck of a lot of roof damage. It can allow water to get in under the shingles. It can allow water to get in under the decking and into the attic. Part of it is that freeze thaw thing that Ian talked about earlier. So you really want to keep your gutters clear of debris, especially this time of year, getting the leaves and things like that out of there, getting ready for winter so that you don't have that ice snow dam situation. Make sure that you seal any exterior air leaks that can expose interior piping to cold air. Pipes can freeze in the winter, and not because of cold earth or anything like that. It's from cold air that's around the piping. It's usually a signal of poor insulation and that sort of thing. So really seal any outdoor cracks where cold air can get into the home. Disconnect garden hoses and shut down the valve. About this time of year, I don't think you're going to be using your hose anymore, or very shortly you're not going to be using your hose anymore. Shut the water off, turn it off from the inside. And drain the pipes between the indoor valve and the outdoor faucet, because you can have a failure of that faucet and you can have a big water line break in your basement. Cut back any overhanging vegetation that can contribute to debris to roof drainage systems, okay? This is beneficial on many fronts, okay? Keeping your trees healthy and trimmed back will help prevent them from falling or limbs falling on the home in a windstorm. It can help prevent power outage, and it can help prevent your gutters from being blocked up from leaf debris and that sort of thing, contributing to that earlier problem of the snow and ice dam. Snow can collect behind roof obstructions like chimneys, dormers, and things like that. If you have a really complex roof with many different slopes and things like that, you can get pockets where ice and snow can collect. So you may want to get a professional company to get in there and clean them out from time to time. Again, if you are doing a major renovation on your home, if you're looking to move, if you're looking to have a home built rather, one of the things to remember is that the steeper the slope of the roof, the better off you're going to be. So a flat roof does not perform well in a windstorm. Flat roofs do not perform well with heavy snow loads on them. Flat roofs do not perform well in hailstorms. As that slope gets steeper, these roofs all perform better. So keep that in mind. A steeper roof is actually better for you in those three events, which is great because then you don't have contradiction. You don't have it performing well in one thing and not in another. They perform equally as well when they're all steep. Okay. And finally, explore inside your attic for any penetrations that could leak warm air into the attic. Also check to see that there are no big gaps in the insulation. These are just a few of the things that came out of the Protect Your Home from Snow and Ice booklet. Next slide, please. So each of these booklets have a risk rating tool in them, a questionnaire. It only takes a few minutes to fill out, probably 2 minutes. They're each 2 pages long. They'll ask you a series of questions, and then you'll get a risk rating at the end. And you'll be able to determine if your property is at risk of, well, any of the 6 perils that we have of books written about, but particularly the 3 things I'm talking to you today. So take a few minutes, go to our website, check out the booklets, and do the risk rating to see if your home is at risk. Next slide, please. So recap. Natural disasters are increasing in frequency and severity both worldwide and in Canada, and I think you agree, judging by the poll. Since 2009, Canada has seen an unprecedented growth in disaster-related costs and impacts, and I think it's only going to get worse. There are many reasons for the trend that I showed you earlier in this presentation. Increased urbanization is the main driver. Degraded infrastructure and climate change are the next 2 most important drivers. ICLR is conducting research into resiliency on behalf of the Canadian insurance industry, on behalf of local governments, and on behalf of Canadians at large. We have loss control information that can be used for property owners. It's free. Check it out. It's very high quality. It's based on the state of the knowledge. It takes a lot of work to put those publications together. I think you'll find them very valuable. Next slide, please. So there you have it. There's my email if you have any questions, and we'll answer questions later on in the presentation. Follow us on social media, and you'll get new information every day. And thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Glenn. I did have one question that came in that I thought might want to tackle now from Chris Chopik. What is the approximate value of uninsured losses as a percentage of insured losses? Do you know that? And then as a follow-up, so I'll let you finish that.
Yeah, so globally, it's about 70-30. So when you look at the international numbers, which include non-industrialized countries, it's usually 70% uninsured, 30% insured. In Western industrialized countries like Canada, it's more 60-40. Generally 60% uninsured, 40% insured. Depends on the hazard, though. Flood is far less insured, and fire is far more insured, for example. But it's generally 60-40 in a country.
But that's still a really big number. So
yeah, it's huge.
Definitely. Yeah, and I don't think people really have internalized that and what that means for their own asset. So, yeah,
That's
really,
right.
really great material. Thanks, Glenn.
No problem.
I think we're going to move on to Moran. Moran, are you still there on the phone?
Yep, I'm here.
Great, and I don't think you're able to see the screen, right? So I've got your deck up. So you are here.
Okay,
And,
I will.
I've got your deck. So
right,
you just let me know when to switch the slides.
Sure, I will. Okay, are we on the cover slide now?
We are.
Okay, if you want to just go to the next slide then. So just a quick overview of the contents of the presentation tonight. So really quick overview on how electricity is produced and distributed, who we are at Alexicon as a local distributor, and just really quickly on the broader transmission network, some common causes of power outages, and then the rest of the presentation will be focused on how climate change impacts electricity, how you can prepare for an outage, what to do during an outage, and then what to do after service is restored. And then I've spoken with our engineering group as to what we're doing at Alexicon to help protect our system against severe weather, and then just some quick contact information for you, for those of you that are in Alexicon's service area. Next slide, please. Okay, so This is a really simple diagram just showing the relationship between how electricity is produced at the generating station. So most people are familiar with Pickering Nuclear, Darlington, and Bruce in Ontario. So those are our generating stations. That power then goes through those large transmission towers that you see that are overseen by Hydro One. Then the voltage is dropped again through transformer stations to the local network, which is then managed by companies like Alexicon that deal with Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, Clarington, Belleville, and Gravenhurst. And then we have our sister utilities at Oshawa, PUC, and Hydro One also does local distribution. So those are typically the three that you would see out in Durham region. And then the fourth player, of course, is the customer. So we have both residential and commercial customers, and traditionally these were just receivers of power, but they are now helping to contribute to the grid with renewable energy sources. So there's really four players involved in electricity production and delivery. Next slide, please. So the role of the local distributor, I just thought I would show some photos of things that you probably see out in your everyday driving around and walking. So you would see the typical buckets on the wooden poles that you see on the streets. Those are transformers. You see these sort of nondescript gray boxes with fences around them. Those are our substations. So those are decreasing the voltage from the large transmission towers to the poles and wires that run into your house. Then there's those green boxes that you see on the streets. Those again are pad mount transformers. And then of course we also do the metering that you will receive your monthly bill from. So that's really what our role is in the energy game. Next slide, please. I've shown this slide really to really talk about the interconnectedness between generating electricity and then how it's delivered to your home. So this transmission network, really it's not just a local or provincial network, it really is North American. And this is a network of over 430,000 kilometers of high voltage lines in Canada and the United States and down into Mexico, including 34 active lines between Canada and United States and 33 that go interprovincially within Canada. And I've shown this slide because this is important. In severe weather, most of the major disruptions that are sustained for longer durations are because of disruptions to the transmission network. Next slide, please. So some of the common causes of unplanned outages, which are typically the shorter duration, either momentary blinking of your power up to maybe an hour or so, are generally caused by things like animal contact, some equipment failure, trees falling on lines, car accidents, and some is loss of supply from the hydro towers. Interestingly, I've learned since being with Alexicon for 4 months now that what we call foreign interference is typically squirrels, and they have caused just in the last 4 months almost 200 power outages just in our service area. And these 200 outages have disrupted 23,000 customers. So I am an animal lover, I say, and I've since taken a slightly different view of squirrels, and we're currently looking at how we can protect our system from having wildlife, particularly squirrels and birds, causing these outages. Next slide, please. So how severe weather impacts electricity? Well, severe weather is among one of the leading causes of the large-scale power outages worldwide. And climate change will increase the risk of more violent weather, as we've talked about earlier in the webinar tonight. And this will cause more frequent damage to our electrical system, which is really a product of an aging grid. We are looking at systems that are well in excess of 50 to 60 years old. We also have a greater demand for electricity with increased use of air conditioners in response to higher temperatures. And so when you combine these, you get more damage to the system and a greater frequency of outages. So I've shown some typical severe weather events that can impact reliability. Those include ice storms, high winds or thunderstorms, extreme heat, and flooding. Next slide, please. So I'll only talk about a few tonight, in keeping with the timing of tonight's presentation. So one of the ones that's most significant to our climate is ice storms. And an ice storm is basically when freezing rain accumulates on surfaces like wires and on the ground. And this is really an effect of warmer air moving over colder air. And I'm not a meteorologist by any length, so I'll keep the explanation simple. But really, as snow falls through that warmer layer, it turns into rain, and then as it approaches that cold layer, it just freezes and turns into ice. So just 1/4 inch to 1/2 of an inch of ice can really weigh down lines and tree limbs, causing poles to fall and branches to snap and make contact. And these icy conditions also make it more difficult for our crews to travel, to do repairs, and assess damage. So ice storms can be quite disruptive and be one of the longest restoration times that you'll see. So I did have a quick poll. Ian, I'll have to get you to run the poll if you can.
All right, just give me a sec here.
So I can't see that, so you'll have to ask the question. Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's being seen. Oh wait, I think people are responding. Great.
So I had my copy. I don't know if it's up on the screen, but I assume so. So it was just a trivia question.
Just wait.
Yeah.
It's people are still answering. Don't give the answer yet. I don't know if you're going to give the answer, but
no,
we're going to give another 5 seconds.
I'm adapting to not being able to see anything. And just
I know, it's hard, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to close it in now. So you can't see the responses, but we had 54% say by 10 times or 170 pounds. 25% by 30 times or 500 pounds. And then the 13% by 5 times or 85 pounds.
Okay, so the correct answer was seed up to 500 pounds, which I learned recently, and I thought quite interesting. So just to show the severity of just what a small layer of ice can do to infrastructure.
Right.
Next slide, please. So extreme heat, that's the other one that is relevant to our region. And power is really only generated at a few places. I mentioned Pickering Nuclear, Darlington, and really these transmission lines have to carry power over very long distances for really only having a few injection points. And these transmission lines have metal conductors in them, and the capacity of the power they can carry decreases with extreme temperatures. So when this metal heats up, it causes the lines, it causes expansion, and the lines will lengthen and droop. And if it droops too much, it can make contact with vegetation on the ground, and this can cause a short circuit. And other lines that are on the network will have to pick up the slack, which also risks overloading them. So as power demand increases from air conditioners and this capacity decreases, voltages can fall, and this what can cause dimming of your lights and for your appliances to run at improper speeds, which can cause a lot of damage. So thankfully, we have what we call smart grid technology, and these are basically real-time automation on our network to help provide information about what's happening in the system, where there's faults occurring. Loads can be transferred to other parts of the grid to prevent failures from occurring. And a lot of this used to be done manually by the control room, and now this helps automate that process. So this improves reliability, and smart grid also allows renewable energy sources to be brought into the grid, and this also helps to reduce outages. Next slide, please. So this is a quick did you know. So the 2003 blackout that we had in Toronto, it lasted for approximately 2 days between August 14th and 16th of 2003. Really, this was caused by exactly that. There was drooping lines in Ohio, and they made contact with foliage on the ground. And what happened was the software that the control room was using had a bug in it, and it wasn't letting them know what was going on the system. So they weren't aware that they had to redistribute the load away from these drooping lines, and this caused a cascading effect all through Northeast United States and up into Ontario. And it affected 10 million Canadians and 40 million Americans. So technology has increased significantly since this event, but this is just an example of how interconnected our power grid really is and the sensitivity of power lines to extreme temperatures. Next slide, please. So thunderstorms. So we typically get a couple big bursts through the summer, and these can produce lightning, heavy precipitation, and bursts of high winds that can be very localized, so they're hard to track. What we see with power lines is that winds typically in the 55-kilometer range or higher cause large branches to break and make contact with lines, and 90 kilometers an hour winds and up can completely uproot large trees. So the event that we had last night that we're still restoring power for today, the winds were predicted around 80 kilometers an hour, and we were tracking that storm last night, and the winds were, we were starting to get outage reports in the 45-kilometer, 50-kilometer range, which is about what we expect. And the highest we saw was about 82 kilometers up in Gravenhurst, and we had massive trees down. So we have multiple crews responding still to Gravenhurst. It's a very rural area, lots of tree cover and lots of overhead lines. In Belleville, our other service area, most of the utilities are underground. So Belleville had high winds, but because it has underground service instead of the older traditional poles and lines, we didn't see as much damage. So that's one of the ways that we're mitigating the effects of severe weather, is to be putting utilities underground. Now, there are obviously some considerations for that, particularly with respect to being near water bodies and flooding considerations, but it's just interesting to look at our different service areas and the effect of wind, depending on what type of system you have. Lightning can also cause strikes to the actual equipment that can cause a failure, and can strike trees directly, causing the branches to break. And the heavy precipitation can cause local flooding, which can damage underground equipment. Next slide, please. So preparing for a major outage. So obviously watching the weather is the #1 priority. Watching Environment Canada, they have sign-ups that you can do very easily to get alerts. If they are issuing a severe weather warning, make sure you have your emergency preparedness kit ready, particularly flashlights, and make sure your cell phone is charged and that you have a battery-powered radio. You can also sign up for outage notifications with your local distributor. For Alexicon, we're currently working on that sign up. We do have a phone number on our website that you can call and speak to a live representative. And we also have an outage map, and most of the local distributors will have the same. So it's important that you know those addresses and phone numbers, and you have them handy just in case you do lose your internet connection. You want to avoid trees if you are outside. You want to avoid them because they can obviously break and fall, and you want to secure loose objects around your home and avoid them in case they are moved by high winds. And if you do see a downed line, it's very important that you do not go anywhere near it. And it's not just a matter of not touching it. You are recommended to stay well back, more than 30 feet away from the line, just in case of any flashing. And please call the power company immediately to report that. Next slide, please. So if there are any directives to turn off your utilities, when you do go to your circuit panel or your fuse panel in your home, turn each of the individual circuit breakers off first and then your main breaker. And that is so that if you do have any short circuits with any of your appliances, as you turn things back on, you're not going to blow your main panel. So just a reminder to turn them off individually and then the main breaker. And if you do have a generator or looking to purchase a generator, please make sure that you have it installed professionally. There is a risk of shock, fires, and there are dangerous levels of carbon monoxide that can be emitted if it's not installed correctly. Next slide, please. So during the outage, obviously staying informed, you want to keep track of service interruptions, either through your outage map with the notifications that you sign up for. And if Wi-Fi is down, then this is where your battery-powered radio comes in handy. You also want to unplug your devices, except for your fridge and your freezer. You should be unplugging all of your smaller electronic devices, though, and that's just in the event of a surge when power comes back on. And then if you are going to be using any fuel burned heaters, like if you are using a barbecue or anything else to cook while your power is out, please make sure you do this outside. Again, carbon monoxide emissions can cause asphyxiation, so you want to do that outside where it's safe. Next slide, please. So after your service is restored, you want to wait until the temperature and the humidity have returned back to normal before you turn your appliances on. Condensation that forms in your electronics can cause damage to them. So if possible, try to wait till the temperature normalizes. Once it's back on, check for damage. If you see any sparks or broken wires, or if you notice any weird smells or feel heat, turn the power off at your panel and call an electrician. And of course, if you've had flooding, do not ever walk through water to get to your panel. Call an electrician and stay away because the water can be energized and cause a shock. Next slide, please. So this is some of the things that we're doing at Alexicon to help protect the power grid in the event of severe weather. So one of the things that we're doing and we're very active about is doing scheduled tree trimming. We do only trim the first 10 feet back from the lines. So in major windstorms, when large trees are uprooted, that 10 feet doesn't make a difference necessarily, but in the smaller storms, this can significantly reduce the event of tree contact. So we're scheduling our tree trimming and we go through our entire service area every 3-year cycle. We also are following the latest standard of the electrical code for poles, which are requiring them to be stronger and to provide a greater phase separation just for increased safety. Our newer subdivisions are also being designed with underground power, so you're not seeing the poles and wires in your backyards like you will in some of the older subdivisions. And as I mentioned earlier, in Belleville, there's a lot of underground distribution, so we didn't see as many power outages there last night despite the higher winds. We're also enclosing our substations to minimize the amount of contact that severe weather can have with some of our electrical components. And then we're equipping our distribution network with things called trip savers and interrupters. And an interrupter basically uses what's called pulse closing technology to detect faults on our lines, and it just uses minimal force. And this reduces damage to our electrical equipment and just extends the service life. And trip savers will shorten up the length of the line that needs to be isolated in an outage. Historically, a larger area, if there was a fault, many customers would be disrupted. By installing this trip saver technology, we can isolate the area and the actual equipment will swing open so that our staff have a visual indicator that the fuse has been blown, and this helps us with the restoration time as well. We're also running a 24-hour control room, so we're watching our grid 24 hours a day to help shorten up our response times. We're doing regular inspections of our assets and trying to do as proactive maintenance as possible. And we also do reactive maintenance when there are trouble calls in the field. Next slide, please. So staying in touch with us during the outage. So one of the things that most people don't know is that when there's a power outage, it's important that you call to report it. People think the control room is akin to a NASA space center and the control room knows everything that's going on. When it comes to things like tree contact, we know that there's been a disruption, but we don't know the cause necessarily. So we have to send staff out to patrol, and this can take a lot of time and delay power being restored. So by using our customers or leveraging them to be our eyes and ears, and when you call in and report that you heard a loud bang, or you see a fallen tree, or there was a car accident, this greatly helps us shorten up our response times because we then know how many resources to send to the site, and we can also attend the site with the necessary equipment to complete the repairs. So please call in and report if you have an outage to help us. And then I've just put our link up to our outage map on our website, and we're also on Twitter where we will indicate outages for specific neighborhoods. So we will be updating our system with being able to notify our customers directly in the near future. But for now, these are the current ways to get a hold of us during an outage. Next slide, please. And this is just my contact information, and just to say thank you for having me here tonight, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Moran. That was great. All right, so that is it. We're on to the Q&A time, and I'm just going to scan. I have maybe a couple from Moran that I'm going to give while you're still there and fresh from your presentation. So the couple questions that are related are around renewable energy and local sources of energy. So Chris Chopik asked, how does distributed renewable energy contribute to grid reliability? And then a related question from Kathleen is around, is Alexicon doing anything to have local sources of energy to be climate resilient? You know, the idea of increasing local energy production.
Okay,
any thoughts on that, Moran?
Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, so on the first question, so the latest stats I saw on the renewable energy side is that it's providing about 5% of the overall energy production to the grid in Ontario. Sorry, can you repeat the question, Ian?
I think the question is around, I guess, local grids. So the idea of that increased renewable generation at the distribution level, to the extent to which that might help improve grid reliability. Yeah, I think that's the question.
So yeah, so it is increasing. It does help provide, you know, additional sources of power to the grid overall. But I think the main benefit is to the person that the homeowner or commercial business that's producing it has its own supply of power. So as customers become increasingly self-sufficient in their own power production, they'll be helping to contribute to the resiliency of the overall grid by not relying on sources, the more traditional sources of energy. Our partner group, Alexicon Group, so I'm part of Alexicon Energy in the distribution side. We do have a partner called Alexicon Group that is responsible for the renewable energy side of our company. You can check them out on the web for more specific information.
Great. And maybe I could add to that. So with the deep retrofit program, so the home energy savings program that the region and utilities are planning to launch next year, we are planning to have a specific rebate available for small scale rooftop solar, I think 3 kilowatt solar installations, so that as an added sort of incentive for homeowners to consider a sort of microgrid or having their own energy source. So that's sort of getting at Jay Cuthbertson's question there. Would it be possible to speak to the deep retrofit program? So basically, we are trying to create a program that's going to incentivize people to and enable people to make investments in energy efficiency and renewable energy systems to make their homes more energy resilient. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're actively thinking about how we might expand that program to be more of a holistic renovation program that addresses adaptation issues as well through sump pump backflow valves and things like that. So yeah, I can provide more details on that. I'm just looking at the questions and trying to sort through them relatively on the fly here. Maybe one for Glenn. There's a couple questions. I don't know if you're seeing the Q&A box here. I'm looking at some questions again from Chris Chopik that are about, what are the typical realities of property devaluation versus land improvement insurance? That might be a bit too specific, or no, I don't understand that one either. Maybe
I'm not
Chris,
sure what's meant by land improvement insurance. I don't.
Yeah, okay. Maybe Chris, if you can retype the question in different words, that might be helpful. Another question is there a measure of the insurability of multiple lightning strike locations? I know these are quite specific.
Lightning is covered under the standard policy. I think, you know, having multiple hits on a same structure would be exceedingly rare. And losses for lightning are not substantial in Canada. I mean, every year there are some losses. Sometimes a structure will catch fire. Other times electronics on a property will be lost due to a surge. But all in all, it's not deemed to be a really problematic hazard in the country. Now, when you wrap it up in a convective storm and you look at everything that a convective storm can bring, yeah, those are definitely problematic. So along with lightning, you get heavy rain, you get wind, you get wind-driven rain. With that, you get roof damage, you get sewer backup, all that sort of thing. That's certainly hail as well thrown in there. So as part of that convective storm package, lightning is an issue, but as in and of itself, it's not a hugely problematic hazard in Canada.
Right. Okay. I'm going to go back to Moran with a question that I had, but then Pia also seconded, I guess, or maybe she was first, or I'm not sure, Pia, he or she, but or they. Why not just bury everything? Why not bury all the lines? Is it cost, Moran, or is it sort of disruption to existing neighborhoods, or a bit of both? Why not just bury all the lines?
I don't know how the whole utility sector evolved. I can get that answer, but I would say that all the new subdivisions are being planned with underground utilities. The poles and wires are an older method, but I'm sure in some cases it's not appropriate to go underground. Like I said, in probably flood vulnerable areas, having your utilities elevated above ground would be a smarter decision.
Mm-hmm. I think part of it is also, utilities being regulated by the Ontario Energy Board. You need to, if you're going to be burying all the lines, that's dollars that need to come from someone, and that's the ratepayer, the who's also the taxpayer. And so I think part of the issue is we want to keep our electricity rates low. That's a prime concern. And so the how do you keep rates low while also funding major capital projects like what we're talking about? I think it's a corollary to kind of municipal infrastructure in some ways as well. So I think that's part of the response as well. I've got another question going back to Glenn here with Chris. Another question from Chris. Glenn, what does every homeowner need to consider when buying insurance, when procuring insurance for flood and related events?
Flooding related events.
What's your advice if you're just out, maybe say you're a new home buyer, you just bought a home in an older neighborhood, what should you consider when buying flood insurance or insurance generally?
Yeah, so first of all, the majority of Canadian homeowners will buy an all perils policy, which is the quote unquote Cadillac policy. And I can't believe we still use that term. Probably a Mercedes policy is probably better, but I think 80% of Canadians buy the better policy, and that would include sewer backup. So first of all, make sure you have sewer backup coverage, and make sure that there's no cap on it. Some companies will put a cap on the damage and will only pay up to a certain amount. Other companies won't. And it's better not, of course, to have a cap on the damage, or to at least have a higher cap. So that's quite important. And secondly is to say yes to overland flood coverage unequivocally. It's only been available in Canada since February 2015. It's a pretty new product. But this idea that, well, I don't live near a body of water, I'm fine. I don't live near a river, creek, or stream. That's wrong answer. If it rains where you live, we all live near water. And I showed you Windsor 2 times. I showed you Sydney, Nova Scotia. I showed you Burlington, Toronto, you name it. Heavy rainfall event is the leading cause of overland flood in Canada. And make sure you have that policy. It's not that costly. If you're in a very high risk zone, you might have problems. There's only one company that offers it for high risk homeowners, but most of us are not high risk. And just make sure that you have it, and make sure that you ask for it if it's not presented to you, but it should be.
Right. That's a great point. I had a question as well. I wrote down that you talked about people getting hit and then hit again in Windsor, or it was at Windsor, I think, and I heard similar stories out in the west end of Toronto, in the like Rockcliffe area as well. So like, if you get hit, what should you do to avoid it happening again? I mean, and maybe that's just going over some of what you said, but one is maybe updating your flood insurance so that you're covered next time. But what are, like, I don't know, maybe just a point or two of like, what should you do? Like, do you just like vacate your basement, or I don't know, maybe just some
Well,
thoughts on that.
you know, in some cases you need an expert, right? Sometimes you'll
Yeah.
need an engineer or a company of that nature, or at least start by calling the city, and they might be able to contribute some information. What kind of sewer system you have in your street? Do you have a combined? Are you still on a combined system where everything leaves your house through one pipe, or do you have a separated system where the water leaves your house in two pipes? You know, one for sewage and one for gray water. That's really important to understand. Get maybe a plumber. If we're talking about sewer backup or that, get a plumber, get a camera into your lateral, the pipe that goes under, basically out of your house, under your front lawn to the public system. Get a camera in there, check it out, see what kind of shape it's in. Do you have an older home with a clay lateral? Clay laterals crumble, they become disconnected, disjointed, roots get in there, they get clogged up. Get a camera through there. It might cost you a couple of bucks, but it can be worth a world of pain. And then start looking into things like backwater valves, you know, disconnecting your foundation drains and hooking up to a sump pump system, making sure that sump pump system has backup power, and that backup power is on a separate circuit from the main sump pump. There's a whole list of things you can do, and it's all on our website. But I mean,
We are going to send out those guides that you mentioned as links to all the goods.
Absolutely. You go to iclr.org, go to the homeowners page. It's all there, that and many other things. Tons of videos on our website. What's a backwater valve? How does it work? Okay, take a look at our video. Okay, I have a backwater valve. How do I maintain it? Take a look at our video. How do I landscape my property to get water away from the property? Take a look at the video. How to disconnect our downspout. All sorts of things. We have videos for all that stuff on our YouTube channel. Some of them are really brief, don't take up a lot of your time, but are very informative. It's all about doing your homework, and really, ideally, you don't want to do this so you don't get hit the second time. You want to do this so you don't get hit the first time. And so do your work, do your homework. And I say really super sarcastically, we have this thing in Canada, it's called private property, right? That's your house. It's nobody else's house. It's your house. You're responsible for it. That lateral that goes under your front lawn is yours. In very few instances in Canada does it belong to the city. That's your lateral. You're responsible for it. You're responsible for everything on your property. And so, you know, we find that when a basement floods, up to 60% of the time, it's because of a problem on the private property and has nothing at all to do with public infrastructure. It's almost always a problem on the lot, whether it's clogged drains due to fats and oils and grease being poured down the drains all the time, whether it's tree roots in there, whether silt has got into your foundation drains and collapsed them over the years. Whatever it happens to be, almost every time it's a problem with your property and not with the public infrastructure. And so you got to do your homework, and you got to take the measures to prevent this stuff from happening. I showed you that flood in Toronto in July 2013. Lots of people got whacked by that flood and then got whacked in the ice storm in December. Same people. We're seeing more and more of this happening all the time.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a good note to sort of end on. The idea, I mean, that's sort of the theme for this is, you know, it's your, you know, how do you as a property owner prepare yourself and your most valuable asset for the changes that are here and that are most certainly going to continue over time. So that's I think a great note to end on. I want to thank everybody for those that are still with us in the audience in particular, for joining and sticking around. So thank you, and thank you to the panelists, Glenn, Moran, Caitlin, for joining us and sharing your expertise. Thanks to Kate Potter, who's in the background helping to pull the strings and orchestrate everything. And so as I mentioned, there will be a survey link and PDF presentations made available to all the registrants. We'll endeavor to get the video up on our website as well as soon as possible, but it might be a week or so until that gets done. And stay tuned for future editions of the climate change webinar series. We're hoping to do this at least on a quarterly basis into 2021. And so if you have ideas as well that you want to put forward, let me know, and we will try to make that happen. So it's 9 o'clock. I'm going to say goodnight, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Take care, everyone.